What if the British Empire wasn't built on gunpowder, but on Bible verses written in a queen's handwriting?
I am most anxious to enlist everyone who can speak or write to join in checking this mad, wicked folly of women's rights, which I consider as a crime against God and nature.
Queen Victoria, private letter, 1870. Charming, isn't she? You might imagine Queen Victoria as the softly lit figure on old postage stamps, head slightly tilted, face composed, Bible clutched politely on Sunday mornings. But behind the crown and corsets was a monarch who believed the Bible didn't just inspire her reign, it legitimized it. And not just her reign, it justified empire, it soothed conscience, it ruled the heart and the colonies. But what most people don't know is that Queen Victoria's relationship with the Bible was deeply personal and strangely political. She didn't just read it, she annotated it, she quoted it, she gifted it, and she wrote about it obsessively, almost compulsively, in letters, journals, and official proclamations. Sometimes with reverence, sometimes with contradiction. Occasionally, with a tone so moralistic it could make the book of Leviticus blush. So the question is, was her Bible a devotional tool or a royal script? And more intriguingly, did she leave behind coded messages in the margins, quiet reflections, warnings, perhaps confessions? Let's open her private journals, turn the pages of the royal family Bibles, and find out what Queen Victoria was really praying for, and whether the crown sat lighter when resting on scripture. To understand Queen Victoria's devotion to the Bible, you have to picture her not as a sovereign, but as a teenager. She was crowned queen at 18, and while most 18-year-olds today are fumbling through college apps or debating whether to delete Instagram, Victoria was being handed the keys to an empire. Her response? She clung to one book. In a journal entry from 1837, she wrote,
I love my Bible. It gives me comfort when I feel weak and guidance when I feel lost.
Which sounds sweet, until you realize this was also the year she inherited control of more than 200 million colonial subjects. And here's where things get complicated. Victoria saw the Bible as a moral compass, but also as a mirror, one that reflected not just her soul, but her sovereignty. Passages about divine right, chosen rulers, and God's appointed kings. Highlighted, annotated, memorized. Her favorites were the Psalms of David and the wisdom literature of Solomon. Rulers who weren't just powerful, but God-ordained. In one letter she wrote,
I feel that I have been called by providence to rule and to do so wisely. May I govern as Solomon did, with justice and fear of the Lord.
She conveniently left out the parts about Solomon's hundreds of wives or the oppressive taxes he levied on his people. But hey, details. Victoria believed monarchy was not only compatible with the Bible, it was affirmed by it. So when she opened her Bible each morning, it wasn't just a spiritual habit. It was a daily briefing from God himself. It's often said that the sun never set on the British Empire, but what people forget is that the Bible rarely closed either, especially in the Queen's hands. Queen Victoria didn't conquer India or Africa or the Caribbean, but she blessed it all, usually with a Bible in one hand and a telegraph to the Prime Minister in the other. Her gift to newly converted princes, a Bible; to British soldiers departing for the colonies, a Bible; to colonized subjects who asked for independence, you guessed it, a Bible. In 1858, after the brutal crushing of the Indian Rebellion, the British Crown officially took control of India from the East India Company. Victoria's proclamation to her Indian subjects included this line,
We hold ourselves bound to the natives of our Indian territories by the same obligations of duty which bind us to all our other subjects, and we desire to see them happy, contented, and flourishing.
which translated out of Victorian diplomatic speak roughly means, you're welcome. Behind closed doors, though, she was a bit more blunt. In a letter from 1863, she wrote,
It is our Christian duty to bring light to these peoples, even when they do not yet understand the need for it.
Ah yes, nothing says light like forced tea tariffs and red-coated infantry. But to Victoria, the Bible gave moral clarity. It framed empire not as conquest, but as conversion. The pharaohs of old built pyramids. Victoria built missions. The logic was divine, at least to her. Queen Victoria didn't just read the Bible, she performed it, privately, daily, and sometimes passive-aggressively. She would annotate the margins with notes like,
A message for Albert today. Patience.
or,
This reminds me of poor Bertie's stubbornness. May the Lord shape him.
poor Bertie being her eldest son, later Edward VII, who preferred fast women and slow mornings to his mother's Old Testament sternness. Her private journals are full of pious quotes laced with royal exasperations. In one note during a family dispute, she copied Psalm 119, 165.
Great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them.
Then she underlined it twice. You have to admire the subtlety. Most of us just send passive-aggressive texts. She left spiritual booby traps in family devotions. Here's where it gets stranger. Multiple sources, including household staff and distant descendants, have suggested that Victoria's Bible wasn't just a spiritual tool. It was also a record book, not in the traditional sense of births and deaths, but of attitudes, events, warnings. She recorded family tensions, political stress, even her own dreams, all in the margins of her personal Bible. One former chaplain recalled,
She seemed to write to herself as though God were reading. I do not say she thought this audibly, but her marginalia were a kind of prayerful monologue.
In other words, her Bible became a confessional journal, crossed with a divine ledger. Some pages contained cryptic notes. A few entries remained smudged or partially erased, as if something had been written, then reconsidered. One faded line from 1879 reads,
The sin of empire is not cruelty, but negligence.
Interpret that how you will. Let's talk secrets. Queen Victoria's Bible wasn't just read, it was coded. Not in a Da Vinci Code kind of way, though we're not ruling anything out, but in the way that private obsession slowly becomes structured ritual. Her marginalia was full of shorthand, half verses, Latin abbreviations, Hebrew references scribbled in the margins. Surprising for a woman who once said of German grammar,
I do not pretend to understand it, nor do I intend to.
And yet, she would annotate verses like, Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. Romans 13:1. Sometimes she'd simply scribble a tiny crown symbol in the margins. No explanation, no footnote. A quiet nod of divine endorsement. Or just Victoria giving God a little reminder of who was running the place on earth. Later pages reveal entries marked R and G, with Bible verses beside them. Some believe R meant rebuke, and G meant grace. Others think they were coded reflections on members of the royal family, like a spiritual scoreboard of who had earned God's approval that week. Yes, Queen Victoria may have been using the Bible as a family behavior chart. And if that isn't power, what is? Victoria's obsession with the Bible didn't stop with her. She passed it down, not just the book, but the expectation. One of her most striking gifts was to her grandson, the future King George V. Inside was a beautifully bound, velvet-covered Bible, inscribed,
For George, that he may rule wisely, humbly, and in God's fear. Not all crowns are gold.
and inside, marked pages, underlined verses, folded notations. In essence, a curated spiritual map, as if saying, here's what you'll need when the throne weighs too heavily, or the parliament won't behave, or the colonies start asking questions. Which, spoiler, they did. George kept that Bible close. In fact, during the First World War, he reportedly traveled with it. But unlike Victoria, he rarely annotated, which may have been just as well. By that point, Britain had stopped pretending empire was entirely divine. Here's one more twist. In 1862, Queen Victoria had a copy of the Bible translated into Urdu and gifted it to Indian leaders, not with a military escort, not with a treaty, but with a handwritten letter. That letter, still archived, reads in part,
We wish you to know that the God of our Bible is not only the God of England, but of all the nations of the earth.
Inspiring, or a polite way of saying, our God is your God now, kindly adjust accordingly. Even her gifts carried a hidden script. Bibles were not just devotional, they were diplomatic. They arrived with gold trim, velvet cases, and invisible strings. Because in the end, Queen Victoria's Bible may not have been just a reflection of her faith. It was a blueprint for her dynasty. When she died in 1901, The world mourned the passing of an era, but inside her private chambers, wrapped in silk and tucked beneath a black-laced handkerchief, was her final personal Bible. Its pages were worn, its corners frayed, and inside was a final inscription.
All is vanity, save to serve God and do one's duty.
Next to it, a pressed sprig of lavender, not a crown, not a title, just scripture, scented and silent. But the words she left behind, in margins, in letters, in royal archives sealed under lock and velvet ribbon, still hum with the weight of a queen who ruled with a Bible open beside the throne. So the question isn't just what she believed. The real question is, what else did she write that we still haven't found? If you want more videos about historical influencers and how the Bible shaped their time with us, subscribe. And leave us a comment letting us know where you're from.